is Islam? We've had a lot of talk already tonight about it, and I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm very unlikely to be able to give you a comprehensive definition. If you listen to Zach, Muhammad, who founded Islam, was a sort of prototype of a just especially benevolent town councillor in the region of Fife. If you listened to him, you would get the impression that it was a pure arrangement of a few minimal issues of governance and so on. Now that isn't the case. Islam is many, many things. It's many complex things. It's not easy to sum it up. It is a religion, however, and it is possible to sum it up to some extent. My own favorite definition is that there are, in essence, three Islams. There is the Islam of the origins, that is the texts, the Quran and the Hadith, the sayings, and indeed the early lives of Muhammad. There is the second Islam, the way in which that has been extrapolated out over the centuries in the body of law known as the Sharia. And there is a third Islam that we often mean when we talk about Islam, which is what do Muslims believe? How do Muslims live? Now, these are very, very deep waters, but there isn't any point in seeing deep waters unless you plunge straight in. Zach said in his comments that we must return to Islam's religious values. But the problem is that Zach's version of Islam's religious values is going to be very different from a lot of other people's. And let me put this point to you at its hardest, but I think it's necessary and it's truthful. Groups like ISIS have the worst possible interpretation of Islam. It should go without saying. But they have the worst possible interpretation of Islam for Muslims and for non-Muslims. However, it is an interpretation of the texts that they have. It is a valid interpretation of the lessons they take from the life of Muhammad. It is a possible interpretation of the texts and traditions they have in front of them. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that Muhammad was not Buddha. He did not live his life as Buddha. The world would be a lot more peaceable if he did, but it wasn't the case. I know that Shabir said in his comments that he doesn't want us to get into comparisons with other religions, but it might just be necessary. Consider the history of Islam, of Christianity, ladies and gentlemen. The history of Christianity, goodness knows, has been bloody. Would it have been more bloody or less bloody if on even one occasion, when one of Jesus' disciples comes to him and says, how many times should I forgive my brother? 7 times or 70 times 7. If instead of saying forgive him endlessly, which is what Jesus ends up saying, he'd have said chop off his head. What would have happened to the history of Christianity if even on one occasion when a woman is brought to Jesus found in adultery, instead of saying he who is without sin casts the first stone, said stone her? I think we can all agree, we should all be able to agree, in a place like this, the history of Christianity would have been bloodier. So it is with Islam. And I know that in a house like this, in this particular era, it's necessary to pretend that some people believe in Christianity, some people believe in Islam, some people do yoga, and that there isn't very much difference between them.
Can I just ask 2 questions, please? Yeah. So the first question I wanted to ask is, to what extent do you distinguish between how a term can be defined and the worst form of interpretation? So, for example, if I say, and I admire the fact that I support a secular state, does that mean I should advocate the worst interpretation of secularism, such as becoming supporting Soviet Union? Second question I want to ask is, to what extent would you distinguish, as you rightly say, the British Muslims being very anti-homosexual, as being following tribal cultures from South Asia, or because we know that that type of idea of killing homosexuality, being anti-homosexual, is not just restricted to Muslims in South Asia, but also Hindus in South Asia, Sikhs in South Asia, and Christians in African countries. Thank you. Quickly, but yeah.
Well, it's a very good question. I'm sorry I had so much to get through that I had to leave you with a numb arm, but thank you for persevering. On the first of those things, no. I think that actually what the other side, by the way, did this evening was actually to essentialize Western culture. We hear a lot about the essentializing of Islam, very little about the essentializing of our culture. Immediately, Tariq Ramadan and others go on to colonialism and so on. It's as if the history of countries like ours is only one of colonialism. It's as if the rest of what we've achieved is as nothing. As for your second question, this is another way to evade it. I don't know any Jew or Christian who doesn't deny chapters in Leviticus, okay? But I find it very, very commonplace, as we had this evening, that people ignore that the hadith, the sayings of Muhammad, are pretty strong on the matter of what you do about the gays. So if we were to arrive at some kind of process of moving beyond that, you would have to start, wouldn't you, by saying, well, the authoritative books and collections of Bukhari Hadith of Muhammad are not gay liberation documents, any more than they're women's liberation documents. You would start by admitting that, but we always go around the other way. We always go, no, it's a specific, it's a cultural thing. It's not to do with religion, it's to do with a particular tribal thing. Often then it's, as we hear quite often about this, it's that the British and other colonial powers imported homophobia to the Muslim world, which otherwise was just great with us gays. And this also is not an accurate interpretation. So, as I say, I would urge that Muslims in debating subjects like this admit what's in the texts and get beyond them fast. But I'm not a Muslim. They have to do the job themselves. I just hope they do.